All right, let's begin on this Friday night with two deadly police shootings. One sparked an investigation that's just beginning. The other led to a prison sentence that just ended early. Let's start in Minneapolis with a shooting that killed a 22-year-old black man. On Wednesday morning, the Minneapolis police SWAT team entered the apartment of Amir Locke. They say they were acting under a no-knock warrant, helping St. Paul police with a homicide investigation. According to Minneapolis PD, Mr. Locke was not named in the investigation's original search warrant. Police say they are unclear how he was connected. Also, Minneapolis released body cam footage from one officer's camera. Fair warning, this clip may be hard for you to watch, but we will freeze it before the shots are fired. If you don't want to see it at all, turn away for about 15 seconds. Here it is. Now, in that video, one officer fires 3 shots. Police say they rendered emergency aid to Amir Locke. He was pronounced dead at the Hennepin County Medical Center. The county's autopsy attributes his death specifically to those gunshot wounds. Police also released this picture. It appears to show Mr. Locke sitting on the couch under a blanket holding a handgun. The department says that the gun was pointed toward the officers, but it's hard to tell from the body cam footage that's come out so far. The interim police chief addressed this yesterday.
The officer had to make a split-second decision to assess the circumstances and determine whether he felt like there was an articulable threat, that the threat was of imminent harm, great bodily harm or death, and that he needed to take action right then to protect himself and his partners. Ultimately, that decision of whether that threshold was met will be examined by the county attorney's office that reviews this case.
The Minneapolis PD identified the officer who fired those shots as Mark Hahnemann. He joined the department in 2015. City records show 3 complaints against him, all of which were closed without discipline. The police department says Officer Hahnemann is on paid administrative leave, which is common during inquiries like this. The Hennepin County attorney says he will work with Minnesota's Attorney General, Keith Ellison, on this case. NBC News has reached out to Officer Hahnemann. We have yet to hear back. Tonight, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey announced a moratorium on no-knock warrants, including on requests for them. Mayor Frey restricted these warrants a few months ago after the murder of George Floyd. But to be clear, his official statement does not ban no-knock warrants outright. Officers may still execute one with the police chief's approval if there is an imminent threat of harm. By the way, this happened in a very different part of Minneapolis than the murder of George Floyd. Take a look at this map. The murder of George Floyd happened in a residential neighborhood. The shooting on Wednesday happened at an apartment downtown. Amir Locke was across the street from the home of the Minnesota Orchestra, and 2 blocks away, the world headquarters of Target. Joining us now is Mr. Andre Locke, Amir Locke's father. Mr. Locke, good evening.
Hi.
And Tony Romanucci is an attorney representing the family. Mr. Romanucci, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Mr. Locke, let me start with you. First of all, how are y'all doing? How's the family holding up?
We, under the circumstances, we're doing the best that we can. We are absolutely devastated, in disbelief. We're in shock, and it's just so sad that we have to be here to talk about our son, my son, Amir, in this way, instead of being able to celebrate his life with him being alive. That sums that up.
Yeah, I realized as soon as I asked the question, Mr. Locke, that it's kind of an unfair question, because we know that there are no words to describe how your family's doing right now. I wonder, just as a dad, what's on your mind, not only with regard to your son, but also just the fact that the Twin Cities has been in this conversation about policing and no-knock warrants and the use of force for all this time, and now it has affected your family directly.
Yes. With seeing everything that has taken place in the city of Minneapolis, with the death of George Floyd, Dante Wright, and many others, those that we didn't know about and those that we do know, you feel for those families. Because when you have children or young, you feel for those families. Your heart goes out to them. And we immediately, having sons, African-American sons, we immediately think of how do we protect our sons from experiencing what is taking place with those children and young ladies of color. I don't like the fact that we have to make things about cultural backgrounds, that we have to make it this way, but I didn't do this. America did this. America made us this way. America separated us this way. We have to think about our sons when they leave our homes. We have to prepare them. We've been preparing them all their lives. I saw a post I believe a year ago, that said that, or recently, I do apologize. I seen a post recently that said, our parents teach us everything. They teach us how to survive, and they teach us all the right things to do so that we're able to survive as adults once we're out of their home. And right, this is what I want you to hear this. They teach us these things, but they don't teach us what to do when they're gone. Now, when I saw that quote, I couldn't help but to look where the quote was coming from, and it was a white male. So it was saying that the family teaches them, their parents teaches them how to do everything that they need to, but don't teach them how to survive without them. Well, it's the opposite in our households. I say that to say this. In our households, too often in Black American households, or Afro-Asian or Latino, and in our communities, we do the total opposite. We have to prepare our children in early stages to, what are you going to do when I'm not here? You have to know how to do these things. You have to be able to do this. What are you going to do when I'm gone? My point for saying this is to say that Amir doesn't have the opportunity to be there, to have life of his own, to have a family of his own. He doesn't have that opportunity to know what it's like. He should have been burying me, not this way. I shouldn't have been burying my son.
Mr. Romanucci, can I ask so far what you have heard from the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul about this investigation that sheds a little light on whatever litigation or actions the family may pursue in this matter? What have you heard so far that's helped illuminate how this happened?
So we haven't heard much beyond what the public knows. But if the city of Minneapolis really wants to be transparent and wants to be held accountable for anything that they've done, they will release the full warrant. They will release the risk assessment that went with the warrant. They will release the affidavit that the judge relied upon to issue an unannounced warrant versus an announced or a knock versus no knock warrant. In other words, we need to know, why was it so important to go search for property after hours, knowing that somebody may and was sleeping inside and didn't have a chance at all when the police came in and didn't announce why they were there. They didn't announce what they were doing there. They walked in, right? They had a key. They walked in, announced, and you saw the short distance between the door and the couch, where Amir had no time to react and to perceive who was there and why they were there. That's what we want. We want transparency. We want it now.
Yeah, and the warrant has not been released yet, at least as of the moment that we're having this conversation. The log of the incident report has been released, and it's clear from the report when when the shots were fired, it says the nature of it was changed from a high-risk warrant entry to a shooting. That bears on this very directly, because after the George Floyd murder, the rules around these warrants were supposed to have changed, but they were still allowed for high-risk situations. So, Mr. Romanucci, I imagine that a big part of this for you is going to be not just finding out why they thought that they felt they needed to do this, but then what the protocols were to prevent something like this from happening.
No question at all, because our position right now is this life should not have been lost. This is a needless loss of life. St. Paul, we know that the city of St. Paul assessed this situation as not being high risk. What was it that Minneapolis then did to change a judge's mind to make this into a high-risk situation? So you are right. There needs to be a lot of digging here to find out what circumstances they used, because clearly the circumstances as we know them now do not bear fruit. Amir was not a threat when the police were at the door. He was not a threat when they walked in past the threshold of the door. He became a threat, according to them, when he held a gun legally in his possession. So we have to understand what happened here, and we don't know that yet.
Mr. Locke, what does justice look like for you and your family at this point?
Looks like accountability. That's what justice looks like. It looks like accountability, because the officers who entered the residence, they startled my son. He's a deep sleeper, an extreme deep sleeper. If you notice when you watch the tape that Amir, he was asleep. He was asleep on the couch with the cover over his head. I know my son, he sleeps on his stomach. So I can tell that he was asleep on his stomach. The way that he tried to get the cover off his head, because if you're laying on your back, it's easy just to pull the cover from over your head. He was fighting to get the cover from over his head when the officer kicked the couch to agitate him. He agitated Amir. He startled Amir, and like any law-abiding citizen, Amir reached for his legal weapon. And also, with being disoriented, I believe, and not being able to see, he couldn't even see. He never had the opportunity. He never got the chance to remove the blanket from over him. He didn't have the opportunity to even know who took his life. And that's not okay. That's not fair. It's not fair to us.
Oh, go ahead, sir. Sorry, go ahead.
I was saying that it's not fair to our family. It's not fair to our community. It's not fair to those who understand truth and who knows right from wrong. Right is right, wrong is wrong. So justice looks like, for our family, accountability and doing what's right. They know that, I believe that they know that this is a mess. So just be accountable and transparent. Thank you.
Andre Locke, the father of Amir Locke and Tony Romanucci, attorney for the Locke family. I wish I had the adequate words to say to you, Mr. Locke. I pray peace for you and your family. I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm sorry that you have to be the latest family to go through this, regardless of what the investigation finds. I wouldn't wish this kind of hell on anybody, but I really appreciate your willingness to talk about this with us. So thank you, sir, very, very much.
Thank you so dearly for giving us the opportunity to speak on Amir's behalf, because he can no longer be his voice. We have to, his siblings, his family, community, and those abroad. We're absolutely thankful. Thank you, guys.
The investigation of Amir Locke's shooting is just beginning. But in Chicago, the saga of another fatal encounter might be ending. A former officer convicted of killing a black teenager is out of prison after serving less than half his sentence. Jason Van Dyke was convicted of second-degree murder and aggravated battery. He shot 17-year-old Laquan McDonald back in 2014. Mr. Van Dyke was sentenced to 6 years and 9 months. Yesterday, he was released after serving about 3 years and 4 months. We asked for your thoughts on this case, especially if you're from that area, and you did come through for us. Here's what Martin from Chicago left in our inbox.
I'm absolutely livid at the fact that this individual was released after 3 years in prison with no recourse. And the city of Chicago should also be livid. If this was any other individual, for example, an African American or black individual, or Hispanic individual, or anybody of any other descent other than white or Caucasian, would be left in prison to rot or to die for years on end.
Martin, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. And some local anti-violence advocates in Chicago are also angry. A number of them were arrested last night during a demonstration. They were taken into custody in the lobby of the Dirksen Federal Building downtown. 9 demonstrators are charged with federal trespassing. They're demanding federal charges against Jason Van Dyke. Among those charged is Kina Collins. She's been a vocal activist against police violence in town, and today she is running to represent Chicago in Congress. Ms. Collins, welcome to the program. Good to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me on, Josh.
What more can you tell us, first of all, about what happened last night with those arrests and with why you and the other demonstrators were there?
You know, we've been fighting for accountability and justice for Laquan McDonald for nearly a decade now. The shooting occurred and the murder of Laquan McDonald occurred 7 years ago. The tape was released 6 years ago, sparking a series of civil disobedience actions across the city of Chicago. Last night, we basically went to the Dirksen Federal Building, which coincidentally happens to lie within the Illinois 7th Congressional District that I'm running in, to participate in nonviolent civil disobedience. And I want to make it abundantly clear that we showed up not to incite the crowd, not to burn things to the ground, but to say that we will not be moved in this situation. And we are willing to sacrifice our freedom to make sure that Jason Van Dyke has federal charges brought against him. And so I'm really proud of my 8 peers who joined me. Will Calloway was one of those individuals. He was responsible for having the tape released here in the city of Chicago. But we are not going to stand for not having systematic change against the loss of Black lives.
And I just want to be clear for those of you who are listening, when Ms. Collins referred to burning things down, that was hyperbole. I know how people kind of get an idea about Chicago and protesting, but that was just so we're clear. I just want to make sure nobody heard that sideways and perked up and looked at the TV real quick like that was just hyperbole. But to the matter of this and of what's happening in the aftermath with Laquan McDonald, I wonder where you think this goes from here. Depending on who you talk to in the city of Chicago, what's happening or not happening is Mayor Lori Lightfoot's fault. It could be the Chicago Police Department's fault. It could be the police union's fault. It could be the responsibility of people in the community in terms of who's responsible for making things better. Laquan McDonald's great uncle, the Reverend Marvin Hunter, said he was disappointed in the sentence, but, quote, "Justice in our eyesight was getting a conviction. It wouldn't benefit anyone in this country for Jason Van Dyke to go back to jail and get 100 years or 1,000 years," unquote. Who do you think bears the most responsibility for advancing justice in this situation, and what would that look like to you?
The collective. We've called on politicians, faith leaders, the community, everyone to step forward. In 2020, we sent a mandate to the Democratic Party and to the country when we gave a majority to the House, the Senate, and the White House that we want equity as far as it comes to this country. And so I think that this falls squarely on the collective, all of us. You know, it's not going to be just one person who pushes for this or one group of people who push for this to get this done. It's going to be all of us. But what we have to do is we have to ask ourselves the pertinent questions as Americans, that why does it require a viral consumption of Black suffering and outrage in order to shame and embarrass our criminal justice system into accountability? We know that justice is impossible for Laquan McDonald at this point, because the only just thing would be if he was alive and breathing. The same for Amir Locke. The reason why I got arrested yesterday without even knowing the story of Amir Locke is because this is a miscarriage of justice that has continuously happened in our country, and we are not seeing the results that we want. We want laws codified on the national and federal level to protect the lives of civilians, and particularly African Americans, and we want, justice.
I do want to note, you're looking live now at pictures of the Hennepin County Government Center. This is in downtown Minneapolis, less than a mile's drive from the apartment where Amir Locke was shot dead by a Minneapolis police SWAT team. This is a caravan of cars that's been going on for about an hour, not quite an hour and a half now, around the government center. And in this area is Minneapolis City Hall. It's the headquarters of the Public Safety Department as well as County Public Safety. And this is also where the county courthouse was, where the trial of Officer Derek Chauvin took place for the murder of George Floyd. Again, these are live pictures from our station KR11 News in Minneapolis of a caravan of cars demanding justice for Amir Locke, who was shot dead by Minneapolis police on Wednesday. Before I have to let you go, Ms. Collins, I'd like to get your reaction to something President Biden said while he was here in New York. He spoke with Mayor Eric Adams about gun violence, and both of them talked about the path forward for police accountability. Before I let you go, I'd like to get your reaction to something the president said. Watch.
The answer is not to defund the police. It's to give you the tools, the training, the funding, to be partners, to be protectors.
We're going to provide funding for cities and states to put more police officers in the places we need them.
So, Ms. Collins, before I let you go, the kickback to defund the police has been pretty swift and rather loud, including from a growing number of elected leaders. If the path forward is more funding rather than less, where would you like to see that funding go?
Yeah, I mean, I'm from the city of Chicago, where we dealt with the largest public school shutdown in American history, with 50 schools shut down. And we didn't get this outrage when they defunded our schools, our mental health facilities, and people are living in food deserts. I want to make sure that we're striking at the root causes of what is causing criminal action to happen in our communities, or these crimes to happen, and it's poverty. When we fight for people to have livable wages and benefits and to lead a dignified life, we improve not just their standard of living, but we improve their ability to have pride in their community. Young children here in the city of Chicago are walking past abandoned buildings, vacant lots, and boarded up schools. That is a moral failure, and that is a public policy failure, and we must and we can do better.
Keena Collins, I appreciate you talking to us about the situation in Chicago. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Still to come tonight, sports and gender. South Dakota is the latest state to block trans athletes from competing in women's school sports. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. If you are transgender, how do you decide what sports teams to play on? In a growing number of states, that decision is made for you, if you get to play at all. Yesterday, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem signed a ban on transgender athletes. The law bars trans girls and women from women's high school and college sports. Here's how Governor Noem explained the ban.
It's about fairness. We fought years ago for Title IX,
so that women had an opportunity to compete. Now, there's many different
competitions where biological sex isn't that big of a deal, and we don't make accommodations for it in debate competitions or academic speech competitions, but in athletics it does matter.
South Dakota's bill is set to take effect on July 1st. It is the first state to pass such a law this year and the 10th state overall. Also this week, the group that picks the U.S. Olympic swim team changed its policy toward trans athletes. USA Swimming set new rules that focus on testosterone levels. They require trans women to stay below a certain test level for at least 3 years in order to compete. The NCAA also has new rules like this. Trans women must document their testosterone levels at least 3 times, including 4 weeks before championship selection. Now, these policies overlap 2 different but related things: your sex, which is what others can see, and your gender identity, which is how you see yourself. What will this mean for trans athletes? And how much does biology really factor into fair play? Let's discuss it with Catherine Oakley, State Legislative Director and Senior Counsel at the Human Rights Campaign. Ms. Oakley, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Has HRC already made plans to fight back against this latest measure in South Dakota? What's your group's response to this?
This is a terrible bill, and we're really discouraged that this is something that the governor has decided to pursue yet again. Last year, she issued 2 executive orders, and this year she followed it up with a law. And while we have not announced plans for litigation at this time, it's a law that we absolutely oppose and have been involved in trying to oppose in the South Dakota legislature.
I should note, by the way, we did reach out to the sponsor of the bill, Fred Deutsch. We have yet to hear back, but that invitation stands because I would like to hear, and I'm not asking you to answer this, Ms. Oakley, but I would like to hear from the supporters of this why they feel that such a measure is necessary or prudent or warranted. I think what I took from Governor Noem was that it seems to be about fairness, that there are certain kinds of competitions like debate, for example, where gender is not as important. I think some of us who actually did speech and debate would argue that, depending on your gender and the way you view people's intuition and sense of reading a room, that it might make a difference. So it depends on how deep down this rabbit hole you want to go. But how would you respond to that argument about fairness?
Yeah, the first thing I would point out is that Representative Deutsch also sponsored the bathroom ban and has been involved as an innovator in anti-transgender legislation for several years. Folks may not remember, but South Dakota actually passed a bathroom ban before North Carolina did. The reason that they were not the ones who went down in infamy is because the governor vetoed that bill, a different governor at that time. And I think it's really important to say that trans athletes have been participating in sports in states across the country for decades. There is no crisis around trans athletes playing sports. What there is a lot of attention to this issue over the last few years. And that's because folks like Representative Deutsch and others have chosen to make this the new bathroom bill. The folks who couldn't peel back marriage equality, they couldn't make people afraid of trans bathroom use. This is where they've landed, is going after transgender youth, playing sports, being able to access gender-affirming health care. And they're doing that because they think they can make people afraid, but it's not because there are actually any fairness concerns. Trans athletes have been playing sports in states around the country for decades. They've been playing at every level of competition, and there's just not been a problem. This is fabricated and political.
Forgive me for interrupting you, but I wonder if you can empathize at all with parents who, just to cut to the chase, are nervous. They are encountering issues related to gender that they've never had to discuss before. They may not even fully understand the difference between sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation, for example, which, for those of you playing the home game, they are not the same thing. Gender identity is who you see yourself as. Sexual orientation is who you see yourself with. Not the same thing. But for parents who are learning about this for the first time, who are like, I don't want to deal with any of this, just keep it normal and keep them away from my kids, who are just freaked out, What would you say to them about these issues?
Look, I do have sympathy. And I'm a huge fan of women's sports. I have season tickets to my WNBA home team. I'm a former high school athlete myself. So this is a really important issue. A lot of people are very connected to Title IX. A lot of people are very connected to the idea of being able to play sports. So this is something that matters to people. And I do understand that. I also understand that not everyone has a trans person in their life. One of the things that we know that really impacts people's support of the LGBTQ community is knowing someone who's LGBTQ. We know that was a huge change in support for marriage equality was when an increased number of people knew people who were interested in getting married or just identified as being LGB. The number of people who know a trans person is much less. And I think that's part of the problem is that there's just a lack of awareness. This seems like a complicated issue to grown-ups. But let me tell you, kids don't think it's complicated. Kids understand that there's some stuff that just is. And if you ask, hey, how do you know that you're a girl or boy? A kid is going to be able to tell you, I'm a girl, I'm a boy. It's going to be clear for them if that's their reality. And it's complicated for grown-ups, but it's not complicated for kids.
Well, I know that parents take athletics very seriously. The only sport I played in high school was speech and debate, so that's why I have that perspective on it. But if that's not a contact sport, I don't know what is. It worked out great for me. I built a career out of it. Catherine Oakley with the Human Rights Campaign. I appreciate you making time for us, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Now, before we move on, we should note that the HRC was the target of a lawsuit this week that was brought by its former president. The organization declined to discuss that pending litigation tonight, but you should know that this week, the former president, Alphonso David, sued. He's claimed that the group underpaid him and then fired him because of his race. The Human Rights Campaign says it fired him over his ties to former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. A report released by New York's Attorney General Letitia James revealed that Mr. David helped the governor deal with sexual harassment allegations. A statement from HRC reads in part, quote, "We are confident through the legal process that it will be apparent that Mr. David's termination was based on clear violations of his contract and HRC's mission, and as president of HRC, he was treated fairly and equally," unquote. Coming up, quote, "President Trump is wrong." Those are the words of his former VP. Mike Pence made that statement today. We'll get to that and some of today's other big stories just ahead. Stay close. We take a whole lot of time to unpack the biggest issues of the day, but here are a few of today's other top stories, including the trial of Stormy Daniels' former attorney. Today, a jury convicted Michael Avenatti of stealing money from his former client. He was found guilty of wire fraud and identity theft. Mr. Avenatti took $300,000 from Stormy Daniels' book advance. That book included details of the adult film star's alleged affair with former President Trump. Ms. Daniels told NBC News she is, in her words, ecstatic about today's outcome, but said she is aware that she will not get her money back. Michael Avenatti is scheduled to report to prison later this year for a separate conviction. He was found guilty of an extortion scheme against Nike in 2020. Speaking of the former president, his former VP said something today that few leading Republicans seem willing to say out loud. Mike Pence spoke to the Federalist Society. He rejected Mr. Trump's false premise that the vice president could have overturned the 2020 election results.
I heard this week that President Trump said I had the right to overturn the election. But President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president.
In response to that, an aide to President Trump told NBC News this falsehood. Quote, "Pence is being disingenuous even about what President Trump asked him to do. He asked him to send it back to the states. He didn't ask him to overturn it," unquote. That is false. We have reported for more than a year now that the former president did, in fact, pressure Vice President Pence to overturn the election. The aftermath of January 6th got two other prominent Republicans formally censured by the party, Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming and Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. And that's because of their work investigating the attack on the Capitol. Today, the Republican National Committee passed the censure overwhelmingly without debate or discussion. The resolution states that the party, quote, must not be sabotaged by Representatives Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, who have demonstrated with actions and words that they support Democrat efforts to destroy President Trump more than they support winning back a Republican majority in 2022, unquote. Let's get some more context on this now from NBC Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell. Hey, Leanne.
Hey, Joshua. Well, the two factions of the Republican Party are on full display today. The MAGA wing versus the Cheney wing. In the MAGA wing, you have the Republican National Committee in Salt Lake City at their annual convention, as you mentioned, censuring Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger for their work on the January 6th Select Committee. It's such a stark contrast to also what happened today when former Vice President Mike Pence decided for the first time since January 6th last year, 2021, to say that Donald Trump is wrong, publicly saying that he could overturn the election. Mike Pence said he could not. Now, as far as what happened at the RNC today, it is becoming very clear how divided the Republican Party is. And there was a lot of reaction to what the RNC did from Republicans who are standing up for Cheney and Kinzinger, including from Mitt Romney, who called it a shame that they were censuring someone who was just trying to find the truth of what happened on January 6th. You had Senator Bill Cassidy, a Republican from Louisiana, not someone who usually likes to stick his neck into inter-party squabbles, says that he was very confused about why the party is censuring these Kinzinger and Liz Cheney. But for the most part, most Republicans are staying on the sidelines, not saying anything, because that's what GOP leader Kevin McCarthy did today at the Capitol when reporters asked him about it. He declined to comment. He didn't say a word, because most Republicans would rather be talking about Joe Biden than they would be rather showing the split within their party. But that's what happened once again today, as members of the RNC were really trying to appease the former president because he wants to keep drawing attention to January 6th and what he says falsely was fraudulent election. Joshua.
Thank you, Leanne. That was NBC's Leanne Caldwell from Capitol Hill. We'd love your thoughts on this next story, especially if you have kids in school. New York City is changing its lunch menus to include vegan Fridays. The first vegan Friday was today. No meat, no dairy, except milk has to stay on the menu by federal law. Instead, it's a green menu with plenty of salads and veggies. Reviews are mixed, depending on who you ask.
Plant-based diet can be extremely healthy, and we know that it can be associated with lower risks of things like chronic diseases, diabetes.
If they gave you a taco at school and it had cauliflower inside, what do you think about that?
Bad.
Bad. Now, maybe you'd think it's fine, maybe you'd think it's bad, but either way, what would you think of vegan options in your kids' cafeteria, especially if that's all there were on certain days? Tell us on social media, email, leave us a voicemail. We're at 888-575-2NBC. Up next, a familiar face is not on The View right now. Whoopi Goldberg was suspended over a comment about the Holocaust and race. We'll go beyond her comment and try to unpack what race really is when we come back. Fans of The View may have noticed that the moderator of the show is off the air right now. ABC News, which produces the show, suspended Whoopi Goldberg for 2 weeks. At issue was this comment she made about race and the Holocaust.
The Holocaust isn't about race. It's not about race. It's not about race. What is it about? Because it's about man's inhumanity to man. These are two white groups of people.
Now, Ms. Goldberg quickly tweeted an apology, and she apologized again in an interview with Stephen Colbert, trying to explain why she said what she said.
I feel being black, when we talk about race, it's a very different thing to me. As a black person, I think of race as being something that I can see. So I see you and I know what race you are. And the discussion was about how I felt about that. I felt that it was really more about man's inhumanity to man.
Did you catch that? I think of race as something I can see. That's what she said. Race can be a tricky thing. And in an opinion piece for NBC Think, writer Michael Crawford touches on this. Quote, as a kid, I didn't think about Jews as Jews or a race or ethnic group different from white people. They blended into the blank canvas of whiteness with other light-skinned people who treated my dark-skinned family like outsiders unworthy of respect, unquote. Race is a social construct, and it has changed over time. Now, that does not excuse what Whoopi Goldberg said, but it might explain it. And that gives us a chance to unpack this concept and see it for what it really is. So joining us now is freelance culture writer Michael Crawford. He is the author of that NBC News Think piece. Mr. Crawford, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Joshua. Happy to be here.
Could I just get you to unpack that part of Whoopi Goldberg's explanation from Colbert, thinking of race as something I can see? When I heard her say that, I don't know if it's just because we are both black people, but I could understand the worldview that led to that conception of race, even though I didn't agree with her comment on the Holocaust. But how do you see it?
Well, I think, as you pointed out at the beginning of the segment, that race is a social construct. Basically, genetic or physical characteristics were chosen, and we were grouped by those characteristics. Now, it's a made-up pseudoscience kind of thing, so it's not. There's no real basis for it, except to make powerful people keep their power. It was framed as a way of, at least in America, as making slavery something easier or more palatable. But really, it's just about how they group people together in these almost random categories that are based on physical characteristics.
How would you define that term? What is race?
Race is complicated, right? It's these physical characteristics. For example, you and I and Whoopi have curly hair. Right? Well, I have little hair, but when I have hair, it is curly hair. And so that is usually a wide set nose, for example. All of those things are generally physical characteristics that are attributed to black people. But if we also think about the fact that there are people in the Middle East with curly hair, there are people in Latin American countries with curly hair, it really shows that race is kind of like The Matrix. Remember the movie? How it was a social construct that was used as a mechanism of control. And so if we think about race as a way for the powerful to maintain their power, then it becomes much more understandable about how race is actually not useful, not working for the vast majority of people. And instead, science has figured out that we are over 99% genetically similar, right, by our DNA. And so in reality, there is that kind of we are all members of the human race is actually really true, even though it's just something usually said to make us feel good.
There's another comment or another piece in The Atlantic by Adam Serwer that had one particular excerpt that I thought got at this in another way that sort of contextualizes this whole controversy. Adam Serwer wrote in part, quote, I don't mean to pile on Goldberg here, who I think is struggling with an American conception of race that renders the anti-Semitism that led to the Holocaust illegible. I regard her remarks not as malicious, but as an ignorant projection of that American conception onto circumstances to which it does not apply, unquote. I thought the use of that word, because words matter, of calling it illegible, I thought that was really interesting. Like, seeing race in this way makes certain things just impossible to notice because it creates this filter that washes it out completely.
And that filter, as you mentioned, is something that's pervasive. It's like the air we breathe. It's constantly pumped into our psyches from the day that we're born. And, you know, in America, we are obsessed with the idea of racial categorization, but it's usually on a black and white spectrum, where anyone who is in the middle is defined by how they are in the context of black and white. So it's really very binary. And especially when you think about Jewish people who can sometimes be white appearing, who can sometimes have skin as dark or darker than mine, who can sometimes be Latino or Asian, it really helps to pull the cover off the social construct of race because there are so many different variations of Jewish people. And I think the point that Adam was trying to make, and he's a fantastic writer, is that the way that Americans think about race in that binary kind of way, that binary construct, is really unhelpful. And as he points out, makes Jewish folks illegible.
Yeah, it's so remarkable in history that, you know, if you were Jewish, Italian, Irish, Polish, German, you weren't considered white. You were considered Italian or Irish or Polish. And yet there have been descendants of former slaves whose skin was so light they could infiltrate, you know, Klan rallies to investigate lynchings. Go look up Walter White from the NAACP for those of you playing the home game. Fascinating. Thank you for helping us break down this concept. Michael Crawford, we appreciate you making time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Breaking news now on our lead story tonight about the deadly shooting of a 22-year-old black man in Minneapolis. The investigation of Amir Locke is just beginning into his shooting by a Minneapolis police SWAT team, but the police department in St. Paul, where the investigation started and Minneapolis was helping, just released a statement on the search warrants that were involved in this case. Here's part of what the statement reads, quote, "After the warrants in this case were signed by a Hennepin County judge," Minneapolis is in Hennepin County, "the St. Paul Police Department asked the Minneapolis Police Department to carry out 3 of them at an apartment complex in downtown Minneapolis. The apartment complex management team complied with the court orders and provided access to the MPD officers," unquote. Again, a no-knock warrant was used in this case, and one of the issues in this matter was whether or not St. Paul insisted on knock-only warrants, and Minneapolis pushed back, basically the genesis of the need for a no-knock warrant. And with that, your weekend may begin. Hope you enjoy watching the Olympics this weekend. And remember, we want to hear from you on school lunches. How would your kid react to having a vegan menu every Friday? We're at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. Leave us a voicemail, 888-575-2NBC, or email us now tonight at NBCnews.com. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Thank you so much for making time for us. We'll see you Monday. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.